19 years. That's how long I worked at Carter Industrial Holdings. 19 years of early mornings, late nights, forgotten vacations, and missed family gatherings. And yet the moment that ended my career lasted less than 30 seconds. It happened on a Monday morning. The entire office had gathered in the conference hall for what we thought was a routine quarterly meeting. Employees filled the room. Managers stood along the walls. Ben Carter stood at the front of the room with a tablet in his hand, wearing the confident expression he always carried since taking over the company. Ben was the new CEO. The son of the man who originally hired me. His father, William Carter, built the company with loyalty and respect. Ben built his authority with arrogance. He cleared his throat. "Before we begin today's agenda," he said, "there's a staffing change we need to address." Then he said my name. Elizabeth Jones. Every head in the room turned toward me. Ben barely looked up from his tablet when he delivered the sentence that ended 19 years of dedication. "You're no longer needed here." No meeting. No explanation. Just humiliation. Right there in front of the entire office. But before I tell you what happened next, if this story resonates with you, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. Now let me introduce myself properly. My name is Elizabeth Jones. I'm 49 years old. And until 2 months ago, I believed loyalty still meant something in business. For nearly 2 decades, I worked at Carter Industrial Holdings. I started when I was 30 years old. Back then, the company was very different. The CEO was William Carter, Ben's father. Mr. Carter believed companies weren't built by numbers. They were built by people. He knew every employee's name. He remembered birthdays. And he respected loyalty. When I joined the company, he personally welcomed me into his office. "Elizabeth," he told me, "this company grows because people like you care about it." And I did care. For 19 years, I helped build that company from the inside. New product launches. Major contracts. Company expansions. I worked through every challenge alongside Mr. Carter. But when his son Ben took over the company 3 years ago, everything began to change. Ben Carter was nothing like his father. Where William Carter was patient, Ben was impatient. Where William valued loyalty, Ben valued control. At first Ben tried to appear respectful. During the first months after his father retired, he spoke about innovation and modernization. He introduced new technology. New policies. New executives. But slowly his real personality started showing. Employees who had worked there for 20 years suddenly found themselves replaced by younger hires. Departments were reorganized overnight. Experience stopped mattering. Results were the only thing Ben cared about. And loyalty. To him, loyalty was just another outdated idea his father believed in. The first warning came during a management meeting 6 months before I was fired. Ben leaned back in his chair and looked around the conference table. "We need fresh energy in this company," he said. No one spoke. Because everyone understood what he meant. Fresh energy meant younger employees. New managers. And fewer people who had worked under his father. When Ben looked at me, his expression carried something I hadn't seen before. Disinterest. Like I belonged to a different era of the company. The era his father had built. And Ben Carter was determined to erase that era completely. Back in the conference hall, after Ben announced my termination, the room fell silent. No one moved. Some employees stared at the floor. Others looked at me with sympathy. But Ben continued speaking like nothing important had happened. "Security will escort Ms. Jones to collect her belongings." Security. After 19 years. I stood up slowly. The room felt heavy with tension. Many of those faces had worked beside me for years. We had built that company together. Ben didn't notice their expressions. To him, the moment was already finished. But to me, it was just beginning. Because the day Ben Carter fired me in front of the entire office, he believed he had removed a problem. What he didn't know was that 2 months later, everything he thought he controlled would belong to someone else. The first morning after losing my job felt strange. For 19 years my day had begun at 6 a.m. Coffee, emails, traffic, meetings. But that morning there was only silence. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the same company mug I had carried home in the cardboard box the day before. Loyalty builds empires. William Carter had given it to me during my 5th year at the company. He believed those words. And for a long time, so did I. But loyalty means very little to someone like Ben Carter. The younger generation of executives he brought in didn't care about the company's history. They only cared about quarterly results. I spent the morning reviewing my finances. After nearly 2 decades in a senior management role, I had saved responsibly. I wasn't desperate. But the humiliation still stung. What hurt the most wasn't losing the job. It was how it happened. In front of everyone. As if my 19 years meant nothing. That evening, my phone rang. I almost ignored it. But the name on the screen made me pause. Damian Mercer. A longtime board member. And one of William Carter's closest allies. Something told me that call was about to change everything. Elizabeth, Damian said when I answered. His voice sounded calm, but there was tension underneath it. I heard what happened. There was a brief pause before he added. Ben made a mistake. Damian Mercer had served on the board of Carter Industrial Holdings for nearly 15 years. He was also one of the few people in the company who truly understood William Carter's philosophy. Loyalty. Stability. Long-term growth. Things Ben rarely talked about. I wanted to meet with you, Damian continued. Why? I asked. Because there are things happening inside the company that concern the board. That caught my attention. What kind of things? Damian lowered his voice slightly. The board is beginning to lose confidence in Ben. That sentence hung in the air. When a board loses confidence in a CEO, the future of that leadership becomes uncertain. Elizabeth, Damian continued. You know that company better than almost anyone. He was right. For 19 years I had helped build departments, train managers, and develop client relationships. Then he said something unexpected. And the board may soon need someone who understands how to protect what William Carter built. Damian asked me to meet him at a quiet cafe downtown the following afternoon. When I arrived, he already had a folder sitting on the table. Inside were financial reports, board discussions, internal performance reviews. I flipped through the pages slowly. Ben's leadership has created problems, Damian explained. He pointed to a section of the report. Aggressive expansion plans. Unstable partnerships. Large executive salaries for new hires. These decisions are worrying the board, he essayed. Investors are starting to question the company's direction. That surprised me. Ben always spoke about growth and innovation during public meetings. But numbers never lie. What does the board plan to do? I asked. Damian leaned back in his chair. That depends. On what? On whether someone capable is willing to step forward. I closed the folder slowly. Step forward, how? Damian looked at me carefully. The company may soon need new ownership. I laughed softly at first. Damian, I just lost my job. Yes, he replied calmly. But you didn't lose your knowledge. That sentence stayed with me. For nearly 2 decades I had helped guide the company's operations. I knew the strengths of every department, the weaknesses of every system, the loyalty of employees who had been there since William Carter's time. Damien continued speaking. The board isn't interested in dismantling the company, he said. They want someone who respects its foundation. Someone who understood the culture William Carter built. Someone who wouldn't treat loyal employees like disposable assets. Then Damien said the words that completely changed the direction of my life. If the right investor group appeared, he said, the board would seriously consider a sale. I looked at him. And you think I should lead that group? He smiled slightly. Elizabeth. I know you should. Over the next few weeks, everything began moving quickly. Damien introduced me to several investors who had once partnered with William Carter. Many of them were disappointed with Ben's leadership. They listened carefully as I described the company's true potential. Its loyal workforce. Its long-term clients. Its strong manufacturing base. One investor leaned back and said something interesting. Sounds like the company doesn't have a business problem. What do you mean? I asked. It has a leadership problem. And leadership problems can be solved. Especially when investors start paying attention. After several meetings, the investor group began discussing a formal acquisition proposal. Lawyers were involved. Financial analysts studied the company's value. And slowly, something remarkable started happening. A plan was forming. The same company that had escorted me out of the building 2 weeks earlier was now becoming the company I was preparing to buy. Over the next several weeks, Damien kept me updated on what was happening inside Carter Industrial Holdings. And the news wasn't good. Ben Carter's leadership style was beginning to create serious problems. Several senior managers had resigned. 2 long-term clients delayed renewing their contracts. Departments that once worked smoothly together were now competing against each other because of Ben's aggressive restructuring policies. Morale is collapsing, Damien told me during one of our meetings. That didn't surprise me. Ben ruled through pressure. His father had ruled through trust. Those 2 approaches create very different workplaces. The board had started asking difficult questions during executive meetings. Why were experienced managers leaving? Why were operational costs rising? Why were long-standing client relationships becoming unstable? Ben dismissed those concerns. According to Damien, he blamed the problems on outdated leadership culture. In other words, he blamed the people who had built the company. That attitude only made the board more uneasy. Because investors don't fear problems. They fear leadership that refuses to see them. And slowly, quietly, the board was beginning to realize something important. Ben Carter might not be capable of protecting the company his father built. Damien arranged another meeting with several board members a week later. We gathered in a private conference room overlooking the harbor. The mood was serious. One of the directors spoke first. Ben's expansion strategy is reckless. Another added. He's replacing experienced managers with executives who barely understand the company. I listened carefully. For 19 years, I had worked beside those same managers. They weren't just employees. They were the company's foundation. Damien turned toward me. Elizabeth, if the company changed leadership today, what would you do first? The question caught me off guard. But the answer came naturally. I'd restore stability, I said. Bring back experienced managers, rebuild trust with clients, and focus on sustainable growth instead of risky expansion. The room went quiet. Then one director smiled slightly. That's exactly what William Carter used to say. For the first time during the meeting, I realized something. The board wasn't just considering selling the company. They were looking for someone who understood how to save it. While the board's concerns were growing, Ben Carter remained completely confident. According to Damien, he believed the company was thriving. He gave motivational speeches about modernization. He talked about transforming Carter Industrial into a next-generation corporation. But confidence can sometimes hide denial. Several executives had already warned him about declining employee morale. He dismissed them. Long-term clients had raised concerns about leadership changes. He ignored them. Ben Carter believed his last name gave him control of the company. What he never fully understood was something his father always knew. A company doesn't belong to the CEO. It belongs to the people who believe in its future. And the board was beginning to believe that future required someone else. By the end of the first month, our investor group had assembled enough capital to move forward. Lawyers began drafting the acquisition proposal. Financial analysts completed their valuation reports. Damien and I reviewed the documents late one evening. "This is a serious offer," he said. "It needs to be." The number printed on the first page represented millions of dollars. But the investors weren't just buying assets. They were buying potential. The potential of a company that had lost its direction. And the opportunity to restore what William Carter had built. Damien closed the folder. "Elizabeth," he said quietly. "Are you ready for this?" I thought about the day Ben fired me in front of everyone. The humiliation. The silence in that room. Then I nodded. Yes. The acquisition proposal was submitted to the board the following morning. Ben Carter had no idea. From his perspective, the board was simply reviewing strategic reports. But behind closed doors, directors were carefully studying our offer. The financial backing was strong. The leadership plan was clear. And the vision for the company aligned closely with what William Carter had always believed. Later that afternoon, Damien called. "They're impressed," he said. "With the investors?" "Yes." "With the plan?" "Yes." Then he paused. "And with you?" I sat quietly for a moment. Because 2 months earlier I had walked out of that company carrying a cardboard box. Now the board of directors was considering placing the company under my leadership. And Ben Carter still had no idea. Inside Carter Industrial Holdings, the pressure on Ben Carter was beginning to show. At first, he tried to dismiss the board's concerns. He continued holding meetings about innovation and future expansion. He spoke confidently about modernizing the company and building something bigger than what his father had created. But behind closed doors, the atmosphere was very different. Board members had begun questioning several of his recent decisions. Why were experienced managers leaving? Why had operational costs increased so dramatically? Why were long-standing clients becoming uneasy about the company's direction? Ben responded to those questions with the same argument every time. Change always creates resistance. But the board was no longer convinced. Damien Mercer kept me informed about every development. "The board is preparing for a leadership transition," he told me one evening during a call. I sat quietly in my living room as I listened. 2 months earlier, I had walked out of that company with a cardboard box and 19 years of memories. Now the same board that allowed Ben to humiliate me was preparing to take control of the company's future. Sometimes the most dramatic changes happen quietly. No headlines. No public announcements. Just a growing realization that the person in charge is no longer trusted. And when that realization spreads through a boardroom, leadership can disappear overnight. 3 days later, Damien called again. His voice sounded unusually serious. "Elizabeth," he said, "the board met this morning." My heart began beating faster. "And?" "They voted." There was a short pause. 6-2 in favor of the acquisition proposal. For a moment I couldn't speak. Because that vote meant something extraordinary. The board had officially decided to sell the company. Sell the company that William Carter had spent 30 years building. But they weren't selling it to strangers. They were selling it to investors who believed in restoring the company's original values. And they wanted me to lead that effort. Ben doesn't know yet, Damien continued. He believes the board is reviewing expansion funding. I leaned back in my chair. The irony was impossible to ignore. 2 months earlier, Ben had humiliated me in front of the entire office. Now the board he believed supported him had quietly decided to remove him. And he still had no idea. Inside the company, Ben Carter was beginning to sense that something was wrong. Executives who once laughed at his jokes were suddenly more cautious. Board members avoided giving clear answers during meetings. Even some of the younger managers he had promoted seemed nervous. Leadership can feel powerful when everything appears under control. But the moment doubt enters the room, confidence begins to crack. Ben called a meeting with several senior executives. "Is there something happening that I'm not aware of?" he asked. The room stayed silent. Because none of them wanted to be the one to answer that question. Silence can reveal more than words. Ben ended the meeting abruptly. But that night he requested a private call with Damien Mercer. "What's going on with the board?" he demanded. Damien answered calmly. "The board is reviewing the company's future." Ben frowned. "What does that mean?" Damien paused before answering. "It means changes may be coming." While Ben struggled to understand what was happening, our investor group finalized the acquisition agreement. Lawyers reviewed the final documents. Financial partners confirmed their commitments. The company valuation had been agreed upon. All that remained was the official transfer of ownership. Damien met me in his office to sign the final documents. The moment felt surreal. For 19 years I had worked inside Carter Industrial as an employee. Now I was signing papers that would make me the company's majority owner. "Once these documents are filed," Damien said, "the company legally becomes yours." I held the pen for a moment before signing. Because this wasn't just a business deal. It was the closing chapter of a story that began 19 years earlier when William Carter gave a young employee her first opportunity. 2 months ago, Ben Carter believed he had ended my career. Now I was about to end his leadership. The following Monday morning, I stood outside the Carter Industrial Building once again. The same glass entrance. The same security desk. The same lobby where I had spent nearly 2 decades of my life. But this time everything felt different. 2 months earlier I had been escorted out of that building by security. Now I was walking back inside as the person who owned it. Damien met me in the lobby. "The board meeting starts in 10 minutes, he said. "Does Ben know yet?" I asked. Damien smiled slightly. "He's about to." We stepped into the elevator together. As the doors closed, I looked at my reflection in the polished metal wall. 19 years of loyalty. 2 months of rebuilding. And now the moment had arrived. Because in just a few minutes, Ben Carter was going to discover something he never expected. The woman he fired in front of the entire office had just bought his company. The boardroom door opened slowly. For a moment I paused outside, remembering the last time I had walked through those hallways as an employee. 19 years of my life had been spent inside that building. Now I was about to walk in as its owner. Damien Mercer stepped in beside me. "Ready?" he asked quietly. I nodded. Inside the boardroom, Ben Carter sat at the head of the long table reviewing a stack of reports. Several board members were already seated. When the door opened, Ben barely looked up. But when he saw me, his expression changed instantly. "Elizabeth," he said, confused. "What are you doing here?" I stepped into the room calmly and took the empty seat beside Damien. Ben frowned. This is a board meeting. Damien placed a thick folder on the table. Yes, he said calmly. And that's exactly why Elizabeth is here. The room fell silent. Ben leaned back in his chair, irritation replacing confusion. What's going on? Damien opened the folder and slid a document across the table. The board has accepted an acquisition offer. Ben looked down at the document. Then he froze. Because printed at the top of the page were the words. Lead investor, Elizabeth Jones. For several seconds, Ben said nothing. He simply stared at the document. Then slowly he looked up at me. That's not possible, he said. His voice had lost its usual confidence. Damien spoke calmly. The investor group has purchased controlling shares of Carter Industrial Holdings. Ben shook his head. This company belongs to my family. One of the directors spoke quietly. It belonged to your father. The words hung in the air like a final verdict. Ben looked around the table. The same board members who once supported him now avoided his eyes. Then he turned toward me again. You? I nodded slightly. For 19 years I helped build this company. Ben laughed nervously. This is some kind of joke. Damien pushed the documents closer to him. It's legal, Ben. And it's final. That was the moment Ben Carter realized something he never imagined. The woman he humiliated in front of the entire office was now the person who owned the company. Ben stood up suddenly. This is ridiculous. But no one in the room agreed. One of the board members folded his hands calmly. Ben, the board approved this acquisition. Another director added quietly. The company needed stable leadership. Ben turned toward me again. Why would you even want this company after what happened? The answer was simple. Because your father built something worth protecting. The room remained silent. William Carter had built Carter Industrial with patience and loyalty. Ben had tried to transform it into something else entirely. Employees had been treated like replaceable numbers. Experienced managers had been pushed out. Client relationships had been strained. Ben didn't respond. Because deep down, he knew everything I said was true. Later that afternoon an announcement was sent to every employee in the company. All staff were asked to gather in the conference hall. The same hall where Ben had fired me 2 months earlier. I stood at the front of the room beside Damien. Employees filled the seats. Whispers moved through the crowd. Ben stood quietly near the back of the room. Damien stepped forward first. Carter Industrial Holdings has entered new ownership. The room fell silent. Then he continued. The new majority owner and CEO is someone many of you already know. He turned toward me. Elizabeth Jones. For a moment the room stayed completely still. Then someone began clapping. Another joined. Within seconds the entire room filled with applause. Many of the employees in that room had worked beside me for years. They knew the history of the company. And they knew exactly what this moment meant. Later that evening I walked through the quiet office one last time. The building felt peaceful again. Like it had years ago when William Carter was still leading the company. Damien joined me near the window overlooking the city. You know, he said with a smile. William Carter would be proud. That meant more to me than the business victory. Because his father had believed in something simple. Loyalty. Respect. And building a company that valued the people who helped create it. Ben Carter had forgotten those principles. But now they were coming back. Before this story ends, I want to say something to you. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel across the world. And remember this. Sometimes the person people underestimate the most is the one who ends up changing everything.